Recently I started wondering what the Undead faction actually brings to the table in Warcraft 3, and how it does that. When you think about it, everything around the Undead, the gameplay, the missions, the design should follow one main idea. They're presented as this unstoppable force with hidden motives, and once they reach their goal, they just leave emptiness behind. But at the same time, the game still needs to teach you how the race works. It needs to be fun, understandable, and guide you step by step from the basics. So I started asking myself, what should this faction really feel like from a gameplay perspective? And how was it actually designed in the end? Did it all come together, or not really? Now that I've just finished the Undead campaign, I thought it's a good moment to go through all of that and also revisit my first impressions with a bit more perspective. So today I want to talk about the main characteristics of the Undead faction, how those ideas show up in missions and gameplay, the heroes and units, some interesting mechanics and features, and overall how the Undead feel so far. And just to be clear, everything here is based only on the original campaign. I'm not including anything from the Frozen Throne or multiplayer yet. Alright, let's get into it. So, remember how I mentioned the Undead as this unstoppable force with hidden motives? That's exactly how the game presents them before we even get to play them. During the human campaign, it's constantly reinforced that no matter what you do, more Undead keep coming. They build somewhere in the shadows, then suddenly the force is just too big to handle. It feels like they attack from nowhere, from all directions, and once they start, they don't stop. There's no hesitation, no second thoughts, just full focus on the goal. And honestly, it doesn't even matter who stands in their way. Human, elf, orc, or anything else. It all becomes just another obstacle. Once the goal is reached, everything left behind feels meaningless and turned to ashes. At the same time, this force feels aggressive, fast, a bit chaotic, and constantly moving forward. There's no real moment to pause or reset, and another big part of the Undead identity is fear. You feel almost immediately when they appear as enemies. Part of it comes from how they behave. Aggressive, overwhelming, relentless, but a big part of it is also just how they look. And because of it, there's this feeling that maybe it's better not to even go near the source of all this, the place where they come from, their base. When I think about that, I immediately get this Mordor kind of image in my head, a place that feels hostile, corrupted, and just wrong, like you really shouldn't be there. And if you are, something already went very bad. So if I try to summarize what the Undead represent, at least from how the game shows them early on, they are growing in numbers, often attacking from the shadows, enemies to everyone and very hard to stop, determined and ruthless, leaving nothing behind that matters, meant to be feared, both in behavior and appearance, and coming from a place you instinctively want to avoid. And now the real question is, once the game puts us in control of this faction, does it actually feel like that? And maybe even more important, how do you design all of this in a way that is still fun, and still teaches you the race step by step? So to answer these questions in a simple way, I think the game actually does a really good job here. And I have to say, once again, the designers surprised me a lot. Honestly, I feel like it's probably not going to be the last time. Now, hear me out. When you look at how the missions are structured and what you're given when you start playing as Undead, those characteristics we talked about, they start to show up pretty naturally. But what I like is that it does not happen all at once. It's more gradual. With each mission, you kind of understand a bit more, both about the strengths and also some limitations of the faction, and it feels intentional, not random. At some point during the campaign, I even caught myself thinking, okay, I see what they're doing here, and that's always a nice feeling. Another thing I really appreciate is that the campaign does not just repeat what we already did as humans. Once again, there are new types of missions, new situations, so it actually feels fresh. But at the same time, the transition is very smooth. It kind of feels like you're flipping the same coin, just to the other side. And I think a big reason why this works so well is Arthas, because we're still playing as him. Now, just on the Undead side. First, there's still that connection. We already know him, so even if this is a much darker version, it still feels familiar. Secondly, Arthas himself is also new to Undead, so as he learns, we learn with him, and that makes everything feel much more natural instead of overwhelming. And third, which I didn't expect at first, as Arthas slowly changes and becomes more aligned with the Undead, we kind of follow that change as well. Not in some dramatic way, but slowly, almost without noticing. Because of that, the campaign can start with simpler missions, but even there something already feels different. We go through familiar places, meet characters we've seen before, but now everything is from the opposite perspective. Instead of defending, we're the ones attacking. Instead of reacting, we take initiative. Even the very first mission is a good example. Collecting hidden acolytes. It's simple, but it already feels different. You move carefully, avoid fights when possible, stay in the shadows. It's less about the brute force, and more about positioning and awareness. And right away it sets the tone. And as the campaign continues, you start to notice that the missions follow a few clear patterns. Firstly, there are missions where you gather something, be it information, units, or important items. Sometimes you can approach it more quietly, sometimes more aggressively, like collecting acolytes or retrieving the spellbook. Then there are missions where you remove specific targets and build your own presence. You grow your army, eliminate obstacles, and just keep moving forward. A good example is the mission where you recover Kel'Thuzad's remains and wipe out the remaining paladins. Then you get missions that are really about momentum. You move from one objective to another, getting stronger and stronger until the enemy just can't keep up anymore. The Silver Moon sequence is probably the best example here. You're not just fighting, you're advancing with a clear purpose, destroying everything on the way until you reach the Sunwell. There are also moments where the game kind of tests the idea of being an unstoppable force. Even when the odds don't look great, like facing multiple orc clans, you still push through and reach your goal. And you start to feel that, yeah, this faction is meant to keep going no matter what. And finally, there are defensive missions. But even those feel very different compared to what we had before. When you defend as Undead, it feels like you're doing it on your own terms. Your base is strong, it's hostile, and full of advantages, like in the final mission, where you just have to hold the position during the summoning ritual. And it really feels like the enemy is the one that's struggling there, not you. And overall, what I really like is how naturally the difficulty increases. Each mission adds something new, builds on what you already learned, and at the same time keeps reinforcing that core Undead identity. It never feels random, everything kind of points in the same direction. And when you look at it like that, it's actually pretty impressive how consistent it all is. Missions alone don't fully create that feeling. A big part of it also comes from something else, the heroes and the units. So during the Undead campaign, we're given access to two main heroes, the Decay and the Lich. And the question is, do they actually represent all those Undead characteristics we talk about? Let's start with Arthas as the Death Knight. As I mentioned before, he's used perfectly as a kind of bridge into this new faction, because just like us, he's also new to being part of the Undead. But at the same time, the change in him is very noticeable. Visually, he's no longer the paladin we knew. Now he's this dark knight riding a skeletal mount, wielding Frostmourne, and everything about him just feels colder. And personality-wise, it's a complete shift. Before, He was determined to protect people. Now he's still determined, but in a very different way. He's aggressive, impatient, focused only on the goal, and there's no hesitation anymore. And when you look at his abilities, they match that idea really well. The Death Coil damages enemies but also heals undead units. The Death Pact sacrifices a friendly unit without hesitation to heal himself. Unholy Aura increases movement speed and regeneration, making the whole army feel faster. And Animate Death temporarily brings powerful fallen units back to fight for you. There's this constant theme of using death as a resource, having no emotional attachment, and turning everything into an advantage. And honestly, the first time I used Death Pact, it felt a bit wrong, but at the same time it kind of teaches you what this faction is about. So overall, Arthas as the Decay feels like a perfect representation of the Undead, but also a twisted continuation of who he used to be. And then we have the Lich, a very different type of character. More calm, more calculated, more focused on control and planning, but still completely aligned with that same cold, emotionless approach. His design fits that perfectly. Floating skeletal mage, glowing eyes, and everything connected to ice magic. And I really like that ice theme here. It naturally connects to coldness, control, slowing things down, and also to Northrend, the Frostmourne, all of that. When you look at his abilities, they follow the same idea. Frost Nova, strong burst damage with slowing effect, Frost Armor, defensive tool that punishes enemies for attacking, Dark Ritual, sacrificing units to restore mana, and Death and Decay, constant damage over time in an area. So again, we see high damage, control through slowing, and no hesitation when it comes to sacrificing your own units. And I think what's really nice is how the Lich complements the Death Knight. You have one hero who leads from the front, aggressive, fast, very direct, and the other one supports from behind, controlling, slowing, dealing heavy magic damage. Together they create this really strong synergy. And then of course we have the rest of the army. I won't go into every unit in detail, but a few stand out. Ghouls, fast, chaotic, a bit unsettling. They move quickly, attack without hesitation, and can consume corpses to regenerate. Crypt Fiends, so big spider-like units, also quite disturbing visually, with the ability to trap air units using web. Meat Wagons, which are honestly kind of disturbing in concept, but very interesting mechanically since they interact with corpses again. Necromancers, allowing you to raise additional skeletons, increasing your army size even more. The Abomination, large stitched together creature that just feel heavy and brutal. And Frostworms, probably one of the most intimidating units with their size, presence, and ice-based attacks. And when you look at all of this together, everything feels consistent. All of the units are fast or overwhelming, visually unsettling, connected to death, corpses, dark magic, and often interacting with each other through shared mechanics. So it's not just the heroes, the entire army follows the same design philosophy, and because of that the faction really starts to feel complete. This leads nicely into another part of the Undead faction that I found really interesting, the base itself and all the mechanics connected to it. Because when I started thinking about it, Undead don't really build in a normal way. It feels more like they take over a place and slowly corrupt it for their own purpose, without really caring what happens to it later. And once I looked at it like that, a lot of their mechanics suddenly started to make more sense. For example, the way you gather gold. You don't just send workers into a mine like with humans. First you have to hunt it. So it almost feels like you're claiming it, taking control of it, before you can even use it. And then there's the ground itself. Instead of adapting to the environment, the Undead just change it. They spread this corrupted terrain, the blight, and only on that ground they can really build properly. So your base does not just exist somewhere, it kind of transforms the area around it. And I didn't expect this at first, but it actually changes how you think about positioning. because the closer you are to your base, the stronger you feel. Units regenerate faster, everything feels more stable, more under control, but once you move away from that corrupted ground, you suddenly don't have that safety anymore, and you can feel that difference quite quickly. And there are also a lot of small details that support this idea, which I really like. Acolytes, for example, don't build in a traditional way, they just summon structures. So they don't have to stand there and work like human workers, they channel the magic and move on. Even something as simple as gathering lumber is different. Acolytes don't do it, ghouls take over that role. So even the basic economy already feels a bit unusual. And then there's the base itself. It honestly feels like a place you just don't want to go near. The necropolis spreads light, it later even gets defensive capabilities. Ziggurats can be turned into towers, enemies get slowed down, damaged, while you're getting all the advantages. So defending as undead does not really feel passive, it feels like the environment itself is helping you. And again, I had that same thought as before, it really reminds of something like Mordor, not just visually, but in how it actually works. You're not just defending buildings, you're defending a place that is actively hostile to anyone who enters it. And even visually, everything supports that. Necropolis, graveyard, slaughterhouse, sacrificial pit, all of it immediately tells you this is not a normal place. It's corrupted, unnatural, and built around the death. And I think what I appreciate the most here is that even the small details are consistent. Nothing feels random. Everything from how you gather resources to how you build to how you defend follows that same core idea, and because of that the undead base does not feel like just a gameplay mechanic, it actually feels like an extension of the faction itself. So after finishing the Undead campaign, I feel like I can finally start to understand what this faction is really about, at least from the first experience. The overall playstyle feels fast, aggressive and very focused on dealing a lot of damage from the start. But at the same time, it's not just constant attacking. It feels more like you strike hard, then sometimes pull back, recover in your base, and then go again. Because that base, the whole corrupted area, is actually a big part of your strength. That's where you regenerate, where things feel more stable, more under control, so it's kind of a rhythm between pressure and reset. From what I've seen so far, it really feels like Undead are built around taking initiative, being the one who starts the fight, creating that first impact. And I think if you hesitate too much or play too passively, it might actually work against you. What also stood out to me quite quickly is how important the heroes are, especially the synergy between the Decay and the Lich. Even something simple like combining Deathcoil and Frost Nova can already create a really strong moment. And then on top of that you have movement speed from Unholy Aura, slowing effects from Frost abilities, and just constant pressure through spells. So it really feels like the heroes are the core of everything here. The rest of the army kind of builds around them. At the same time, the units support this idea quite well. With ghouls, fiends, necromancers, you can build up numbers pretty fast. And with things like raising skeletons, your army can actually grow during fights. So when you start applying pressure, it can keep going. But I also noticed something that feels like a bit of a weakness. Outside of the base, the army can feel a little fragile. There's not much natural healing when you're away from the blight, at least from what I've experienced so far. So you can't just stay in long fights without thinking. You need to be a bit more careful with positioning and timing. I actually like that because it creates this balance where you're strong and aggressive but not completely unstoppable in every situation. So overall, my current impression is that the Undead are focused on fast initiative-based play, capable of dealing a lot of damage quickly, a bit more fragile when out of position, very dependent on heroes and ability usage, and extremely strong when fighting around their base. And when I compare that to the human faction, it really feels like the opposite approach. Humans felt more steady, more defensive, more about sustaining longer fights, kind of slowly wearing the enemy down. Here it's different. Fights feel more decisive, and if they last too long, it might actually not be in your favor. Of course, this is still just my first impression. I've only finished the original Undead campaign so far. I haven't played the Orcs or Night Elves yet, and I haven't touched the Frozen Throne, so this is really just the beginning. But honestly, seeing how different humans and Undead already feel makes me really curious about the other races. I don't really know what to expect yet, but I'd love it if all of them were this distinct in their own way. Because if that's the case, then Warcraft 3 is doing something pretty special here. Overall, I'm really happy with how different the Undead faction feels compared to the human one. It really feels like the other side of the same coin. No matter if you look at it through the story, the missions or the mechanics, everything points in that opposite direction, but at the same time it's still clearly connected. And I think that connection is what makes it work so well, because once you've played both sides, you start to see the bigger picture a bit more clearly, and you appreciate both of them more. I had a lot of fun just going through this campaign and trying to understand how all of this fits together. And honestly, the more I see how different humans and Undead are, the more curious I get about the Orcs and the Night Elves. I really don't know what to expect yet, but it would be amazing if all four races felt this distinct while still somehow staying balanced. Because that kind of variety is not that common. And just a small note, if you're more interested in the story and the character side of the Undead campaign, I also made a separate video where I focus only on that part. So if that sounds interesting to you, you can check that other video out as well. And stepping back for a moment, this whole thing is basically my slow return to Warcraft 3. I'm going through each campaign carefully, trying to understand both the story and the gameplay, and later on I want to properly learn one race, choose it as my main, and eventually try multiplayer. So it's going to be a long process, but that's kind of the point. If that kind of slow journey sounds interesting to you, it would be really nice to have you here along the way. And next up, the Orc campaign. Thank you so much for watching, and I hope I'll see you next time.